When you're on the inside, when I'm talking about the inside, I mean like you got the inside gossip, you got the inside scoop, you know what I mean? It's like you're one of the people on the inside of like whatever situation's going on. I remember I was watching I think it was a TV show. I don't want to spoil it, but like I was watching a TV show and there are basically these group of people that are working together and there's like a situation that's come up and it's personal and it's not like ready for everybody to know yet. So then somebody's like, "Are you on the inside?" And that person's like, "Yeah, I'm on the inside." And it's like, "Are you?" And then you're like, "No, but I will be when it's time and when it's ready and stuff like that." You know what I mean? And basically what I'm trying to get across is that like those select people are like maybe yourself or in situations where like you're on the inside or you're in the know or you're the person that like you have that little piece of information or that inside scoop, that inside knowledge, the true story to a situation. And I often think about like when you're that person, when you're on the inside, you have like so many options, so many choices available of like ways to influence certain people's lives or certain people's situations, you know what I mean? It's kind of like that meme that goes around where like people are like me after giving like the craziest advice in the world or like giving this person like advice that like maybe they asked for or maybe they didn't ask for or like me commenting on their situation or giving them advice and then saying like but I don't know just in case it ruins their life. You know what I mean? Because like it's one of those moments where you really could influence somebody's decisions. It just takes the right person to push, you know what I mean? It takes the right person to kind of say, "Hey, go." And those are the moments that I think we have to acknowledge or know about ourselves is that like when you're the person on the inside, when you're in the know, when you actually have influence and you actually have like a way of contributing to another person's life or you have a way of like, "Oh, I know this person, so I'm going to offer this thing." You know what I mean? It's like you're giving them the opportunity to make a choice or you're influencing their decisions is what I'm basically trying to get at here. And then they take it and things go one way or things go another way, you know what I mean? And that's the kind of power that we don't talk about as much or that we kind of like it's kind of like a weird moment to reflect about like, man, of all the things that I've chosen to do or the way that I've thought or the way that I've handled certain situations or maybe talked to certain people, I bet I could have handled it differently or I could have chosen something else. You know what I mean? I feel like oftentimes I look back on certain choices or certain decisions I made and I kind of feel like I was a lot more protective of myself. I was a lot more emotionally like, I want to be the good guy. You know what I mean? I felt that oftentimes that like I would make choices or I would make decisions mostly for myself that like made me seem like I was a pretty, I was the good guy. I was the nice person. I wasn't trying to get involved or hurt anybody's feelings or do anything wrong. Like you couldn't say bad things about me or you couldn't like, there was no way you could really find a flaw with like what I was doing and whatnot. You know what I mean? And looking back on it now, I often think, well, I don't often, but like I often like reminisce or maybe on occasion think about like that wasn't how I really felt. Like I may have chosen that particular choice because I wanted to be good. I wanted to be nice. I wanted to be kind. And I didn't overall just didn't want to be involved. You know what I mean? Or I felt like my involvement in this or like if I express my true feelings, it can be perceived as like a bad thing, Like, I'll give you a fake scenario. Kind of like if your friend is like saying something about, I don't know, let's say they're talking about baking something. You know what I mean? And they're saying that, like, I'm going to bake brownies. You know what I mean? I'm going to bake some brownies and I'm going to give them to the bake sale. Now, you are their friend, okay? Let me just put the scenario out there. They say, I'm going to bake brownies for a bake sale. And you say, oh, okay, that sounds really good. That sounds really nice. But you're their friend. You know what I mean? And you know that they suck at baking. And the last time that, like, they baked anything, it didn't come out all that good. Now, in this situation, right, you try to be the good person and believe in that person and say, hey, that sounds like a really good idea. You know what I mean? It's a bake sale. What could go wrong? You know what I mean? But then there's the other part of you that's like, you know, obviously you want to tell them the truth and it might hurt their feelings. You just tell them like, hey, you suck at baking. I don't think this is the lane for you. Maybe you should, I don't know, maybe you should get some help or have somebody else do it because you might ruin it. You know what I mean? And that's kind of how I feel about myself or certain situations where I was like, you know, you're on the inside and it's like, obviously if you had spoken your mind, maybe it would have, like, truly spoken your mind, you know what I mean? It would have angered the other person, or I guess maybe your take wouldn't have been as kind or as nice or what the other person was genuinely trying to hear or whatnot, you know what I mean? And that's how I kind of feel now, is that whether or not it's right or it's wrong or it's nice or it's bad or, you know, it's rude or whatever, it's like I'm more controlled or I'm more focused on, like, doing what I feel is right. You know, before I was more concentrated on, like, my, I guess, my basic image or how I portrayed myself, you know what I mean? How I handled situations in the nicest way possible and the best way possible, you know what I mean? And oftentimes I feel like that conflicted with, like, you know, logically it's like I don't want to be a bad person. I want to be the good guy. I want to be the best person. I want to be the nicest guy in the world, you know what I mean? And so logically you go like, I have to make nice decisions. I have to make nice choices. I have to do the nice thing, the right thing, you know? And then a moment comes along where it's like you feel like doing something for you. You know, obviously it's selfish, obviously it's wrong, obviously it's like, no, I'm not going to. What you actually feel and what you, like, want yourself to be are at odds, or they're conflicting with each other, you know? And I guess you kind of, I don't know, get to this point where you think to yourself, or you think to maybe other people that, like, instead of being who you really are or expressing how you really feel or what you really think, you try to sugarcoat it a bit. And in sugarcoating it, you know, I feel like you're not fully expressing who you are, if that makes sense. It's, you know, you're covering up. And then when the real stuff happens, I guess maybe your true colors show. It comes across as like, whoa, I didn't know you were, you know, I thought you were this blue color, but now it turns out that you're actually, like, you know, this mahogany or whatever. You know what I mean? I don't know. I just said a random color. But you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I thought you were this, but you're actually that. You know what I'm saying? And then you kind of realize that how often you censor yourself or you maybe hold back. Now, sometimes holding back is a nice, you know, it's often seen as a nice thing to do, and that's definitely a part of your personality. Don't get me wrong. That's choosing the kind thing to do isn't always the wrong thing to do, or isn't always, like, untrue to yourself. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's really about, like, the scenario or the situation, right? Like, obviously with the bake sale scenario that I gave, it's not, you know, perfect enough to encapsulate the full, like, the full array of scenarios or situations that could happen, you know what I mean? But in that certain scenario, I think it's maybe the way I feel now would be like telling the other person is that like, hey, you suck at cooking, you know what I mean? Or suck at baking, you know what I mean? But not in like a, I guess it's also in the delivery and in the tone that you give it. You know what I mean? I would do it as a joke or sarcastically or in a humorous tone. So that way it's like, no way, dude. You're like you suck at baking. You know what I mean? It's like I don't think that's your lane. Maybe you should get your mom to do it or have somebody help you or actually like, teach you how to bake. You know what I'm saying? And that's the kind of way I feel about it now. But before, I guess I would be a lot more like, okay, sure, go ahead, do whatever you want to do. You know what I mean? Or maybe I would offer myself to like help them out. And that doesn't make me, I guess, fake or covering up or basically hiding my true colors or whatever. It's mostly just about like what you choose or the choices that you make. You know what I'm saying? But like I don't know, for I don't know, maybe another scenario like your friend is going through a really tough time or a really tough scenario with like maybe their significant other or their boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like their partner. And you're in the inside, right? You know all of the knowledge, you know all of the backstory, you know your friend, you know their significant other or their partner or whatever, and you're kind of like, okay, I'm on the inside. I know the real story, the real gossip, the real juicy details. And now my friend or whoever is asking for my advice. What should I do? How can I like, help them out or ease their mind on this certain situation? And I feel like maybe sometimes when it comes to those interpersonal or like those relationship kind of issues, you always feel like you don't really want to make choices for other people when it comes to that stuff, you know what I mean? But when offered the opportunity for like a little bit of input or maybe some sort of like, hey, if you ever need to talk about it or you want, an opinion on something, maybe I'm not a bad person to talk to, right? And there's often times where people will offer suggestions or options or solutions, and then they're just not taken. Because I'm guilty of that, you know what I mean? Of people offering me advice and then I choose not to take it or I'm dismissive of it or I'm just kind of like, I'm just going to do my own thing anyways, you know what I mean? I was kind of hoping you would just like agree with me. And I guess that's what most people are looking for in those moments is like they want somebody who kind of agrees with them or kind of is on their side of certain things, you know what I mean? So you're on the inside of your best friend who's dating this guy or whoever, you know what I mean? And you realize that, oh snap, the guy that she's dating is actually an alcoholic. So she wants to get him sober. She's trying to like make him a fixer-upper, you know what I mean? I can fix him. I can get him off the booze. I can change his way of life, you know what I mean? I don't want him to be drunk all the time. I don't want him to have to feel this type of way anymore, you know what I mean? And I love him. I want to be with him and stuff like that. And you're on the inside and you're like, that guy's going to drink no matter what, you know what I mean? And as, maybe it's about like maybe limiting his alcohol intake and not just cutting him off cold turkey. You know what I'm saying? And maybe you also suggest that like possibly the best thing to do for yourself is to remove yourself from that situation and give them the opportunity to do it for themselves. You know what I mean? Don't try to stay so that way you can fix them. Leave so that way they realize that like I need to make a change if I want good things in my life, like my ex or whoever. You know what I'm saying? And maybe in that particular scenario, there are certain parts of it that, well, I guess with any scenario, you have to pick and choose, right? It's give and take, you know. It's not one thing certainly all the way through. Sometimes it's mostly, I don't know. It's mostly like on a case by case basis. You know what I mean? Depends on any number of circumstances and moments. You know what I mean? Moments that maybe you aren't a part of or you aren't particularly involved in. But again, when you're on the inside, I'm assuming that you know. You get what I'm saying? So how often do we have like those, I don't know, connections or those personal relationships that we can kind of mold and shape and change and turn in certain different directions or whatnot? You know what I mean? Um, but then I think that there are certain situations like that with like the alcoholic or with the bake sale and whatnot, where you actually give your real opinion, you give your real ideas and your real thoughts on certain subjects, and then they're genuinely taken seriously and they turn out really good, right? Like you tell them, you should leave him or you should avoid alcoholics like him because they could be dangerous. You know what I mean? They're alcoholics. They're addicted because they want to be addicted. That's just who they are. You know what I mean? You can't fix it. Or you can't change it. I suggest you leave. And then they actually do leave, and maybe better things do happen. And it's kind of moments or things like that that make you feel like, oh my goodness, like I'm of real value to this other person. I'm actually like connected to this person, and I feel like I'm really listened to, or people genuinely see me as somebody that they can talk to, and I have proof of reference or like proof that I can help people. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't know if any of this makes sense. I imagine like police officers are on the inside, right? Like, obviously because a crime has occurred. You know what I mean? But like, when you're on the inside of an investigation, you know what I mean? When you're the lead detective, when you're the lead officer, whoever, investigating the crime, investigating the scene, investigating like these horrible things that are going on, you think to yourself, or maybe you piece together kind of the some of the moments that have taken place. You know what I mean? You're on the inside of the criminal's mind. You're on the inside of the suspect. You're on the inside of all of these different relationships, and you're learning so much information at any given time because you don't know what is going to tip the scales. You know what I mean? So when it comes to like a detective or like somebody who has to like learn about things, it's often about like understanding the relationships that people have to one another. So like in a murder investigation, it's okay, who died? All right, it's Gene Longbottom. Okay, I'm just making a made up name. Gene Longbottom is married to Martin Longbottom. Now, is Martin Longbottom the killer? Well, we'll have to figure out the relationship, and then you start going from there. You know what I mean? He's suspect number one, and it's like, why would Martin Longbottom kill Gene Longbottom? And then it's understanding and getting inside of that relationship, and then it's realizing that, okay, well, maybe it's not Martin. Maybe it's her ex-boyfriend or this person or that person. Like, you just try to get as much information as you can to solve who did it, why they did it, how, when, what was their motive, and all that other kind of stuff. And that's for them to, like, obviously because a crime has occurred, they want to arrest the bad guys or the criminals involved in that thing. But at the same time, we're talking about like crime. You know what I mean? It's part of their job to figure out, like, okay, why did they do this? Who did it? And all that other stuff, right? Now, they obviously have more access to certain things because they're, you know, cops and it's their job. It's like that the criminal justice system, like, allows them to dig in deep into people's lives. But I'm talking more so like you and me, you know, regular people who have friendships, or we know people and we live in a community, right? And we have certain inside information or the inside scoop on, you know, I guess on certain scenarios or certain events in our lives. Now, back to the original point. When you're on the inside, when you're in the know, it can often feel, what's the right word? You can often feel a bit of pressure or like a bit of mental anguish having to know what you know about certain people, you know what I mean? Not that it's always like bad, but I'm saying like, I don't know. How far do you get to know somebody before it gets to like be too serious, you know what I'm saying? And I don't know. I guess that's why some people just like to keep an arm's length to people. You know what I mean? You don't want to get too close or too involved because getting on the inside of other people's business can be, you know, it can mess you up in ways that it maybe shouldn't, or in ways that like you get too inside, you know what I mean? You get too involved. I'm mostly talking about like, you ever see those TV shows where it's like somebody meets someone else and like instantly they become a part of each other's lives? Like they learn something really bad about the other person, you know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh, I found out that this person is, like, let's say you find out that this person is like secretly like a thief. You find out that like, oh snap, you're the, you know, you're the bank robber, you're the person who's like this criminal or whatever, you know what I mean? And then automatically like they form a bond or a friendship of some kind. I don't know. I don't really, my point is sometimes that like there are those moments where you get too involved or you're too personal, or the intermix is like, okay, this is more than what I anticipated or what I initially wanted to be a part of. But now that you're inside, now that you're in it, you know, and you gotta figure out like where you are in all of it, you know. Because I've often thought about like those scenarios where it's like, what if I found out that like a family member, you know what I mean, was like actually like a serial killer or something, you know what I mean? It's like, what would I do? What could I do? What's my next step? You know what I'm saying? You ever think about that? Like, and that's like that, and that's like that inside information that like other people don't know, or people want to know, but they can't like pinpoint or figure out by themselves. You know what I'm saying? And I guess the obvious answer for me in that scenario is that like I go to the cops, but the weird part is like, I don't know. What can any of us really do? You know? What does being on the inside really give us other than like a bit of drama in our lives, you know? And that's the thing, is that most of the time when we're on the inside of people's lives, it tends to be gossip. It tends to be like over dramatized or unnecessary drama. You know what I mean? I remember back in like school, there would be people, I mean, the main drama in school all the time was like who likes who. That was like the main drama. And I remember very vividly like seeing people so upset about certain things, trying to learn information from like other people or from one another and whatnot, you know what I mean? And it kind of felt like, I don't know, what's the right word? It felt like, why are we all worried about this? Like, it's not that serious. Like, obviously looking back, but at the time it was, people were just treating it so dramatically, which is kind of funny now thinking about it. But like, you ever see those moments where it's like, everybody in class knows something, but you're kind of oblivious to it, or like, I don't know, maybe it feels like something's happening in school that you aren't aware of because you're not like on the inside of it. But then you talk to somebody who is on the inside of it and they kind of like, so this is what was happening, and then blah, 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 you know? And then you're like, oh, snap, I didn't know that was going on. You know what I mean? It's like, well, actually, Tiffany and Brandon were dating, but then, you know, it turns out that Sarah also had a crush on Brandon, and then they started, you know, hanging out, and then they kissed, and then Tiffany found out, and she was heartbroken, and that's why she failed at her test, and that's why she, like, switched tables or switched seats with such and such, and you're like, I had no idea any of this was going on, you know what I'm saying? And then you kind of realize that, you know, people's lives are pretty, you know, they can be very dramatic, but like, at the time, you're kind of, you don't know until you know. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is that you don't know anything that's going on until you actually like are in the know. So in that scenario that I gave, like that used to be the situation at school, or, I mean, I guess maybe that's like maybe a dramatic case of it, but that's kind of like a part of what might be going on, you know? So anyways, when it comes to being on the inside of those situations, you kind of, I guess you kind of ride it out until things change, you know what I mean? Like in the school scenario that I gave, right? Like once the school year ends, you're going to a new class, you're going to a new thing, you're doing another step past it, you know what I mean? It's not going to be the same forever. It's basically like forcing change, you know? What's a force of change? Is that like, well, the school year is going to end, summer's going to happen, and then we're going to come back into a new classroom, we're going to go up a grade, and we'll see where things go from there, you know what I'm saying? And oftentimes it's, those kinds of changes don't happen like they used to. Like for school, it was like, okay, we're going on to the next grade, like we're changing everything. Now it's kind of like, I've been working the same job for 10 years, and I live in the place where I have work, and I have this group of friends or people that I don't plan on changing either. So it becomes that weird point where it's like, you know, certain changes in your life aren't environmental. They have to be inner change, right? They have to be your mindset and your change of perspective and on your life is what's really going to progress you past certain things, you know? So when it comes to like that, you know, Brandon, Tiffany, and Sarah situation, right? Like in school, you can get over that pretty quickly because the next day or whatever, you know what I mean? Or the next school year, everything's different now, right? But then with, I guess, being an adult or whatever, you know, in the real world, it's like that kind of stuff happens, and, you know, nothing really, let's just say that nothing really changes or nothing really drastic happens all that much. In the same way that, I don't know, it would for school, because you can't change your environment. You don't go to a new class, you know what I mean? You work at the same job. right? Like, you ever think about those people that are like, that have a really good job, a really nice high profile job, you know what I mean? But they stay in that spot or they stay in that career for a certain amount of time, you know what I mean? And it feels like, oh, I got a promotion. I should move on to like a whole new thing, right? But it's just a different office or a new change, you know what I mean? But you're still in the same place. I don't know. I'm just trying to compare it. Is that like if you date a coworker and then you guys break up, but then you guys still work together and whatnot, you know what I mean? Your environment doesn't change, but your relationship to one another has. So that kind of situation kind of forces you to adapt personally on the inside rather than having to adapt physically. Now I know that there are people that can like obviously move, find another job, find another opportunity in the same job in a different place, but I'm mostly talking about like places that maybe you can't. You know what I mean? I don't know. My point is when you're on the inside of like, I guess, relationships or people or scenarios, situations, right? Does it often, I guess it can often feel, I don't want to say overwhelming. Overwhelming is the wrong word. It can often feel like, you know, it feels like you're, you know what, it can feel like you're involved and on a human nature kind of a level. You know what I mean? It goes to show that the social aspect of humanity is ingrained into who you are, you know, in all of us, really. And it's because of those things that we get to really be social. We get to really be human. We get to really interact and have relationships and build bonds with other people, you know, positive or negative, you know? And so I think about how people on the inside are really just learning new things about people. And that's the same with like police officers and detectives, right? It's like you have to learn about people in order to understand them. And being on the inside of things better helps you understand others. And once you understand them, you can either relate to them, you can either disassociate or push away or stuff down or reject, you know what I mean? But when you're on the inside of certain situations or certain moments or involved with certain people, you realize that like I have to, or you have to make a choice of some kind, you know? What are you going to do now that you know certain things or you're involved with certain people or you're doing certain things, you know? Either you're all in or you participate or maybe you back out or you're half in, you're half out, you know what I mean? You get to really learn a lot about people, about yourself, and about how we can change, you know? How those experiences change us in the long run. So, you know, I honestly don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what I'm saying, but I just kind of felt like it was an interesting thing to talk about how we get involved with people and then once we're involved, we're in it, you know what I mean? We make choices and we are a part of people's lives and we're giving life as well. So you just get to see that like what you build up, or that how your experiences, you know, have built up certain things, I guess. I don't know. But anyways, thank you guys so much for listening. Um, you know, have you ever like had those thoughts or those moments where you're thinking to yourself like, imagine if you were on the inside of certain scenarios, you know what I mean? Like I was talking about the crime stuff earlier, but like you ever think about like, oh man, what about those people that knew something and they didn't do anything? You know what I mean? Like that's the kind of inside news that like I think about sometimes, where it's like, how did you be a part of this person's life, or genuinely have no idea that this person was a criminal, a murderer, this person, you know what I mean? Like, how did you not know? And I found that it was kind of, you know, it boggles my mind sometimes, because I think to myself, like, they were involved and they didn't do anything, or they didn't reach out, or that's the kind of insider moments that I'm talking about, or that I'm kind of like, if I was there, I would have done everything totally differently. I would have done everything right. You know what I mean? I'm talking about myself here, but like, I'm just like, I would have done everything right and they did everything wrong. And, you know, you put blame on other people, but you know, that's the kind of like insider information that I'm talking about, you know, people on the real inside, people who can make the real choices, you know, that can really be part of change, and like, you know, what went down and what's actually happening, you know. I think about that. I thought that was a interesting topic of like how often like those moments, they don't always happen to us, you know what I mean? But I thought it was an interesting thought. So anyways, thank you guys so much for listening. I'll talk to you guys all next time. Thank you.